This is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to do a 40k discussion and we're going to talk to you about the issue with relying on stats and how stats lie. Before we get into it, I just want to say thank you again. The community's been great and very supportive of me. I wanted to take some time to thank my patrons. Obviously, I've got a Patreon. If you want to support the channel, you can jump over to our Patreon, and the link is in the description. We also have our Teespring store, so you can feel free to jump into Teespring and support that way, get some cool merch. But again, just thank you to the supporters. Thank you to the players who make up the community. We are growing, we are thriving, and it's all because of you. Overview. Are statistics good or bad? How can we learn from them? Some examples of bad statistics and the importance of critical thinking. These are all going to be pretty straightforward today. This might be a little bit longer of a video just because there's a lot to kind of break down and go through, but I'm hopeful that once we go through it, you'll be able to kind of understand why when people start complaining about the game and about win rates and all these other things, you need to take some of that complaining with a grain of salt. Statistics, I mean, they're not good, they're not bad. They are what they are, but I will say that bad statistics are bad. Good statistics can be reliable and useful. And what I mean by that is, you know, let's think back to when Games Workshop first introduced their Games Workshop terrain layout. And when they did that, they said, hey, our go first win rate, that's what the GFWR is there, our go first win rate is about 50%. I forget the exact percentage, but they were like, it's like a 52% go first win rate because our amazing terrain layout. It was so good. Our game is so much more balanced. And I do remember this, and you can actually pull that article up in Warhammer Community still. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this doesn't sound right. It's a nice statistic. It sounds good, but let's dig a little deeper into it. And what I found was that it's not that the game hovers around a 52%. It's that when you average all these percentages, you get to 52. And what I found was that it was a lot of extremes rather than a tight grouping with a few outliers. So like Guard had a 35% go second win rate, and they had like a 40% go first win rate, I think, at the time. And again, I can't remember the exact statistic site that I looked at to find the information at this point. You do a little research on your own and you're going to see. You know, Drukari had about a 70% go first win rate at the time. And I think Chaos Knights had like a 36%. So if you add 36 and 70, you get 110. And then you divide it by 2 because there's 2 in this sampling, and you hit 55. And that's kind of how they got to their amazing go first win rate of around 52, was there were just a lot of extremes with a few armies clumped in the middle. And that, like I said, that was the general state of the game. Admech, really high go first win rate. Drukari, really high go first win rate. And the bad armies had a really bad go first win rate. Like good statistics, and obviously I'm shouting out Goonhammer here. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but they had some really solid 40k stat reporting. There's going to be a link in the description, and you can see quite a bit there. You can find the win percentage of different armies and different sub-factions and all these other things, so you can really break it down. And my first example here is Adeptus Custodes, and the reason that's my first example is I know a couple Custodes players, and I know they complain about how bad Custodes are. So if we look at Adeptus Custodes, and all the stats that I'm reporting on, you can actually select what date you want to go back to. And we went back to August 1st. As of recording this video, these stats were accurate. And so as of August 1st, there have been a total number of 2,571 games, and the Army's won 55% of those games. The equivalent Shield has only won 40% of those games, but they only make up 10 of those 2,500 games. It's most likely that it was a newer player that did a couple of local events, or maybe a couple newer players that did a local event, or somebody went to like a GT and just got raffle stomped. So 10 games doesn't really alter too much. And then Custom had an 87% win rate, but also only 8 games. So it was probably, again, just one player or maybe two players who took a couple of RTTs type of situation, or GT. The rest of the faction hovered between 50 to 60% win rate. What this information means is that Custodes players have won more than they have lost. The only factions that were below 50% were the Aquilin Shield with 10 games, and then Shadow Keepers with 300 games, but they were at 49.17%. So they're right at 50%. Every other sub faction for Custodes has at least a 52% win rate. So when Custodes players are complaining about how bad their army is, they're misrepresenting. Either the army is good and they're bad, or the army's just not as powerful as it was at launch, and to them that means it's bad. So I just wanted to start there. So these are good statistics though. We can kind of dive deeper and understand what these win rates mean. Let's take a look at Orcs. Orcs is another faction, and again, August 1st. Overall, they have a 48% win rate, which is in Games Workshop's Goldilocks zone. They want everything to hover between 45 and 55. So they seem balanced. Like they're right in the middle. Custodes were at the top of the Goldilocks zone, bordering on being unbalanced. But again, there's some caveats there, as we saw. And then Orcs are effectively right in the middle of that Goldilocks zone. Custom has a 66.6% win rate. The downside of this is there are no custom cultures in the book, so we don't even know what that means. Like there's no way to create a custom clan. So anything that's being reported as custom, we don't know what that information means. So it's effectively useless data. And in addition to that, they only made up 18 games out of about 2,500. Less than a percent of the games had custom, and that custom was a 66.6% win rate. And so, like, that small sample size really drastically impacts our average. If we remove that custom because it's useless data and we don't know what it is, it's going to drop the orc win percentage rate by about 8%. So it drops them to the low 40s. So we're no longer inside that Goldilocks zone at all when you adjust for these random 18 games that don't have any data to support whatever it is. Goffs make up almost half the sample size, and they have a win rate of about 51%. Goffs and Blood Axes are the only factions outside that custom one with a 50% win rate or better. And I think Blood Axes, I don't have the data right in front of me again, but I think Blood Axes were right around the same, right around 52. The next best faction was Death Skulls with a 46% win rate. And then everything else was mid 30s or worse, with Bad Moons hitting in the 20s. So what that means is you have two factions, Blood Axes and Goffs, that are effectively carrying this magical 48% win rate for this army. You have 18 games that are creating a drastic spike in the curve that causes the average to raise by about 8%. So when people talk about orcs being good or orcs being balanced, they don't really mean that orcs are balanced. They mean that one or two clans are balanced. And those one or two clans, one of them had a lot of DLC in one of the campaign books. So, like, they just got extra rules, and without those extra rules, that clan would be a lot worse. And now we're going to do one more breakdown. We're going to talk about Guard, and that's because everybody shits on Guard. Everybody talks about how bad Guard is. They're the worst. Super terrible. And they are sitting at a 41% win rate overall. Cadia sits above the average at 42%, but Catachan sits even higher at 46%. So Catachan must be better, right? Not necessarily. Cadia is represented by 624 games, and Catachan is represented by 54. So, what that means is, Catachan players are likely playing Catachans at small RTTs and local events that are reporting to ITC. And, Catachan players are playing Catachans, if that makes sense. So you're getting people who like Catachans, who are playing Catachans, and who know how to use this army. Whereas Cadia is kind of like the generic, I don't know what to play, so I'm playing Cadia, and they have all these extra rules, so you get an influx of players playing Cadia that wouldn't normally. It seems like a lot of information, but basically, when things get extra rules from campaign books, especially when you talk about competitively, they're probably going to see more play than the other factions. Whether that's good or bad is irrelevant. The other thing to consider is that Tallarn sits at 57%. Using those statistics, we would see them sweeping the meta, right? If Tallarn sits at 57% win rate, why isn't everybody playing Tallarn? But when you dig deeper into that information, there's only 7 games with Tallarn. And again, using the powers of deductive reasoning and critical thinking, we can look at that and go, well, it's probably just like one guy who's done a couple local events near him. Custom sits above the Army average at 43% and has a very large sample size of 325 games. It's interesting to me that you see Cadia being represented so well, but Custom is the next highest and has a better win rate. So clearly, people are seeing a lot of play out of custom factions. It just surprises me that so many people are just dead set on playing Cadia. And if you think about it, just like with the Orcs, if you drop Tallarn because there are only 7 games, and you just take them out of the equation completely, their win rate probably drops down to the probably the high 30s without doing the math. That's my guess. These are all things to think about when we consider whether or not an army's good. Okay. And we're gonna take a little bit of time to kind of touch on starter factions and niche armies as well. And what I mean by that is starter factions are armies that tend to come in big faction starter boxes, and they will tend to have lower win percentages. Marines, for example. Every box comes with Marines, so they have the easiest access into the game. You can go and you can spend half as much money to get a full Marine army because you can split those starter boxes with people and have 2,000 points of Marines faster than probably almost any other army and cheaper than any other army. Marines will suffer the most because of this, because they are in every box. It's not like Chaos was in the boxes last edition and Necrons are in the boxes this edition, because the counter to those is always just some kind of Marine. What you got to take into consideration is that if Marines are at 40 to 45% win rate overall, that's not necessarily bad because of their ease of accessibility for players. So right now, Marines are sitting at about 39%, and that's just Codex Marines. I'm not going to get into the different flavors of Marines and how they all have their own different win percentages and blah, 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 blah. So Marines have this interaction. They're at 39%. It's arguably lower than they should be. They should probably hover, like I said, between 40 and 45 because of the relative amount of new players that play them. But I don't think they're too low. I don't think they're an army that's ever. I don't think they're an army that should sit at 50 plus win rate. Because if their win rate is that high, that means a lot of these newer players that don't actually know how to play the game are winning more games than they should. And that's just kind of my opinion on it. And Blood Bowl is a good example. Blood Bowl is another game that has a similar interaction. If you look at the Nuffle statistics, because Nuffle does a lot of statistics reporting, you can look at the win rate for humans and orcs. And we're not talking about the current edition of Blood Bowl. Let's go back to the previous one because they have a new team in the box. But as of the last edition, for the entirety of this game's creation, the starter box always came with orcs and humans. And when Nuffle reported winning percentage stats, orcs and humans had a lower than expected win percentage. And again, it's because of the same concept. You have new players getting their teams after splitting a box, and then they're going to tournaments, they're playing the game. at various events and tournaments and leagues, and they're losing because they're not as good at the game as the people who are playing other things because they've been playing longer. And so that's just something to keep in mind when they start reporting on Marines. And it's hilarious because Games Workshop also just released a statement about it and basically said you guys should just get better at the game. And we're going to talk about niche armies. And niche armies are armies that they don't tend to spike in the meta. They don't tend to really change that much. And the people who play them are just people who play them, if that makes sense. Like, you're not going to see a sudden massive wave of people playing this army. You might see a little spike at their codex release, but it's not going to be like when Tau came out and everybody played Tau, or when Craft Worlds came out and everybody played Craft Worlds. Like, your meta hoppers and stuff aren't necessarily hopping to these armies because these armies are not easy and they tend to attract a specific type of player. Like, they want these armies tend to have a high skill floor, and so they're good because the people who play them are good. And some examples would be Yanari or Gene Stealer Cult. And like I said, bam, right there on the slide. They tend to have weird stats because, again, they're generally not ever going to be the hotness. They do have a higher skill floor, and the players that tend to play those armies, they're good with those armies because they play those armies, and they tend to just be a little bit better at the game. And Gene Stealer Cults, I don't know what their stats are right now. I'm not going to look them up. I have played with that army. I've used it on the tabletop. You can score and you can win, but you're probably not killing a ton of things. Yanari's interesting. Yanari has a 55% win rate, and actually here it's actually 52% win rate as of this recording, but it's underrepresented. So as of me recording this video, only 10 people in the Midwest had ITC rankings at the time. And I was one of those people. So 9 other people. Most have 2 or less events. So, and again, like, that was me. I was 2 or less events until like 2 weeks ago. That's crazy when you think about it. There's less than 150 players nationally. That's less than 3 players in each state when you average it out. And again, there's only about 23 to 24 people that have 3 or more events. So again, if you've got 25 people that are playing this army consistently, they're going to have a higher win percentage than an army that has just like 1,000 players. And again, for a good comparison, Blood Angels have almost 760 nationally. So you have 5 times as many players, and you have a lower win percentage. You have a lower win percentage because you have more players playing it, more beginning players playing it. And, so you just have these different interactions that cause your win percentages to be skewed. Players that are consistently playing the army are going to do well because they're playing the army. They're not hopping from army to army. And I think that's going to wrap up this video on stats. I feel like I was a little bit rambly. I apologize, but I hope, listening to that and watching helps you understand when people talk about win rates and how good an army is, they're really not talking about win rates and how good an army is. They're talking about whether or not that book has one specific way to play competitively. And it is not a direct reflection of how good or competitive a codex is. It's a direct reflection of how good or competitive one specific list a codex can bring is. So, again, just things to keep in mind. As always, Patreon tiers, $1.50, $5, $10, $20. All the information is on the screen right now. And then big shout out to our immortals, Captain Too Tall and the real Donnie G. Both of those guys been amazing. Appreciate the support. And then all the awesome links right here, as well as in the description. And again, just a reminder, we Twitch, hit me up on Twitch. We hit 50 followers. We're giving away a combat patrol. Patreon and Teespring if you want to support me. Appreciate it. Otherwise, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, follow me on Twitch. You guys are awesome. Thank you.